they switched their dress shoes to heavy boots in preparation for their somber march through the cemetery's rain-soaked mud. They lined up single file, passing umbrellas to incoming guests so they could weather the storm too. And then they saw the bride and groom waiting on the other side of the road. The mourners' hearts turned to the pair like sunflowers shifting to catch the rays of sun. It was they, the mourners, who sang from the Sheva Brachot, the traditional wedding blessings.
Sameach tisamach reim ha'uvim, kesamechacha yitzircha began Eden mikedem.
The loving partners shall rejoice, they shouted, as you caused Adam and Eve to delight in the Garden of Eden. Our sages taught, when a funeral and a wedding coincide, the funeral procession must yield before the wedding procession. Some rabbis have concluded from this teaching that weddings are more important than funerals. But many Jewish laws argue the opposite. I believe both of these conclusions are flawed. Joy and sorrow do not eclipse one another. Rather, they enhance and inform each other. Life is meant to include sorrow and joy, both highs and lows. And this teaching acknowledges that rarely do the two ever materialize in neat, isolated ways. Life ebbs and flows beyond our control. I learned this firsthand this summer when just 2 weeks before I stood under the chuppah to marry my now husband, my grandmother died. During the days leading up to our wedding, it felt impossible to switch gears. Every touch of happiness felt wrong, both out of place, even immoral. What helped us successfully hold these incompatible feelings in balance was our community, the friends and family, many of you included, who kept us company in the valley of grief and quickly thereafter gave us permission to rejoice in life and love. Whether it was a visit at Shiva, a thoughtful letter in the mail sending condolences or congratulations, and sometimes both, these caring gestures and heartfelt words enabled us to embrace both the mourning and the dancing fully and gratefully. I've seen the same confluence of events manifest in your lives, often unexpectedly, as you have faced loss and pain on the verge of celebration. I feel blessed to have witnessed the way you care for one another, showing each other the same grace you offered me. Enduring these experiences underscored for me that our greatest treasures in life are the relationships we nourish. Relationships make our lives richer. They literally make us feel more alive. Unfortunately, these recent years of COVID have strained our capacity to connect with each other. At times, even our family members have posed a threat to our health, or vice versa. We were robbed of the opportunity to hold a loved one's hand before dying. Many of us were isolated for weeks in our homes. And though Zoom and FaceTime gave us the gift of communication, neither could ever satisfy our longing for a friend's embrace, a grandchild's touch. And although COVID is not the same crisis it once was, we are still feeling lonely. United States Surgeon General Vivek Murthy writes that even before the pandemic, The country was experiencing an epidemic of loneliness, driven by the accelerated pace of life and the spread of technology into all of our social interactions. With this acceleration, he said, efficiency and convenience have edged out the time-consuming messiness of real relationships. You would think after the pandemic, we would try to be closer to each other. But many of us barely pick up the phone anymore. We rely on text messaging because it takes less time. We do not call anyone after a date because we are afraid that will make us look desperate. We go to a restaurant, say hello to the waitstaff, but then order our food from a digital tablet on the table. And when we do sit with company, we are often separated by a virtual wall because each of us is glued to an iPhone or an iPad, and I am just as guilty as everyone else. Our Jewish tradition recognizes that loneliness is a natural human experience. In fact, loneliness was embedded in the human condition from the beginning of creation. But almost immediately, God realized that loneliness is too painful to sustain indefinitely. Only 2 times in the Torah, we read the words, lo tov, not good. The first time is after God created Adam. God says, lo tov heyot ha'adam levado. It is not good for a person to be alone. After God saw that being alone can lead to a feeling of loneliness, companionship was intentionally built into the design of God's universe, beginning with the creation of Eve. Ever since the partnership of our tradition's first couple, Adam and Eve have shaped our understanding of relationships and have made their way into each new couple's union. Our clergy bless us under the chuppah with the words of the Sheva Brachot, praying that we may be lucky enough to rejoice as Adam and Eve did, not only to be happy, but also to enjoy meaning and comfort in our togetherness. After Adam and Eve wed, their lives become challenging. They make the mistake of eating from the tree of knowledge, and God bans them from the Garden of Eden. Even worse, they're cursed with suffering and death, the awareness of mortality and frailty, the hard truths at the heart of the human condition. Inside the garden, they were literally made to be together. But outside the garden, they were faced with a choice: to be alone or to remain together. Despite the banishment, the suffering, and the prospect of dying or losing the other to death, they chose love. Judaism invites us to summon the courage to love. Our literature recognizes the difficulty of this task. Our Siddur reminds us it is a fearful thing to love what death can touch. But God asks us to invest in love, and not just with intimate partners. The book of Genesis begins with a couple, but most of its stories teach us about the dangers of wounded relationships among siblings and family. The book culminates in a transformational moment of forgiveness between Joseph and his long-estranged brothers. And Torah continues in its next book, Exodus, with a unification story about the coming together of the Israelite community, an entire people in a relationship as a single great family. The Jewish people, our people. Science supports Judaism's call to relationship with evidence-based reasoning. Author and Harvard professor Arthur Brooks writes in The Atlantic that the key to happiness is committing our time and energy to relationships. He quotes a study from 2008 that reported, "Very happy people socialize with their relatives on average 11 more occasions a year, 7 more times with neighbors, and 5 more times with friends. And not for nothing, they also attend religious services 7 more times each year." Membership in the Happiness Club requires that you be in generous love and allow yourself to be loved. Brooks urges us to dedicate the kind of seriousness to our relationships that we usually reserve for our careers, and that we not leave the quality and intensity of our bonds to chance, but instead take hold of the reins. 3 weeks before my husband, Rowie, and I stood under the chuppah with our extended family and friends, Cantor Kleinman and Cantor Rodniski officiated at an intimate exchange of rings and marriage vows in my grandmother's hospice room, with some of our closest family members standing by as loving witnesses. Suddenly, joy and sorrow, dancing and mourning, a wedding and a funeral merged. In a single moment, like bride and groom, emotions were united, neither stopping for each other, but intertwined. Here I was standing at my wedding, talking to my grandmother for perhaps the last time, granted the very lucky opportunity to share intentional departing words. My vow to her was that Rowie and I would spend our lives emulating the love she had shared with my grandfather, her partner in life for almost 67 years. And that was the only time I ever saw my grandmother cry. She was not so scared to die. Her greatest fear had been that leaving this world, my grandfather would be alone. But seeing us standing there by his side, she knew he had us, and we would take care of him. Now she knew her legacy had found its way to the generations of her family, the next generation to stand with the courage to choose love and enter into relationship despite the loneliness of existence, like Adam and Eve before us. On Rosh Hashanah, we say, Yehi ratzon milfanecha, Adonai Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu ve'imotenu, shet chadesh aleinu shana tova umetuka. May it be your will, eternal our God, that this be a sweet year for us. As we look around tonight at our friends and family, and I encourage you to actually look around, our WRT community, let us give thanks for each other and remember that it is us, our relationships, which themselves are the sweetness. Shana Tova.